What if the biggest threat to a political party isn't war overseas, but what families feel at the kitchen table? In this striking and unusually blunt interview, Senator John Kennedy argues that America's next political battle will not be decided only by Iran, oil blockades, or foreign policy strength, but by whether ordinary parents can afford to live, sleep, and breathe without financial pressure crushing them. With one-liners, warnings, and political contradictions packed into every answer, this moment becomes more than a television interview. It becomes a snapshot of a party trying to prove it can manage both global conflict and domestic pain at the same time. And beneath the humor, the real question remains. When election season arrives, what will voters remember most? The war abroad or the cost of life at home?
From a great state of Louisiana is Senator John Kennedy. He sits on the House Appropriations and Judiciary Committee. Senator, thank you so much for joining us. When we look at just X and statements and political positions, it's hard to believe that Lindsey Graham and Rand Paul are in the same party when we look at just Operation Epic Fury. So that shows the veracity of opinions and positions on our foreign policy. But we're talking about gas prices. We're talking about how this operation is affecting us here at home. You're in the Senate. Those are your colleagues. There are a tremendous amount of pieces of legislation that we want to see through. But when it comes to the midterms, do you think that you and your colleagues, the Republican Party and Congress, has made the case to stay in office, stay in power, and is Epic Fury going to hurt you?
Well, if we lose the midterms, it won't be because of Iran. Would you give, if he were still alive, Charles Manson a nuclear warhead? Of course you wouldn't. That's why we had to go Catwoman on Iran, and it has worked. Iran, both the public and private sector, is being held together with duct tape and spit. They have one thing left: the sale of their oil, and the president has cut that off with a blockade. I predict that we'll have a deal with Iran, where Iran that is a win for America within the next 2 weeks. The American people understand what we're doing in Iran, and they understand that higher gas prices were predictable, and that they'll go down after the conflict is over. If we lose the midterms, it'll be because we didn't talk about what moms and dads are worried about when they lie down to sleep at night and can't, and that's primarily the cost of living. Mm-hmm. And look, there are too many distractions. You know, I love the president like a taco. Don't always agree with him, but I think he wants a better world. But I don't agree with him about this new holy war with the Pope. Look, I'm not Catholic. I was raised a Presbyterian. When Becky and I got married, I was Presbyterian. She was Methodist. We compromised. I became a Methodist. I have great respect for Catholicism. And even if I didn't, the Pope is entitled to his opinion. Why do we want to have a fight with the Pope? It's a distraction, and the press just sucks it up like a Hoover Deluxe. I would like to see the president talk about all we have done to control the cost of living. Look, the president is not the father of this inflation. He's not the daddy, but he's got to raise the child, and we've got a good story to tell. This one big, beautiful bill is going to help a lot of people in terms of their taxes and a lot of small businesses. And that's what I wish the president would talk more about. If we talk about it, we'll win the midterms.
Well, Senator Kennedy talked about there being a deal with Iran at some point and gas prices coming down and everything looking pretty good right before the midterms. But what about inflation? And you've mentioned it several times. That could really rear its ugly head in the fall as we approach the midterms. What then?
Well, inflation before Iran was, right at 2.75%. It's up about 90 basis points because of the price of gas. The price of gas and diesel fuel will come down after the conflict is over. You know how we deal with inflation? We deal with inflation by growing the economy, by increasing wages, by helping small businesses earn more money. We did that in the One Big Beautiful Bill, which is just starting to take effect. We have a housing bill to lower the cost of housing that the Senate's already passed. It's being held up by the White House, or rather by the House. I wish the president would call the few House members over there who are holding it up and tell them to stop being, don't be deep dish stupid. Pass the bill. But we will win the midterms if we talk about these things that we've already done, which are going to increase wages and stimulate the economy, and wages will rise faster than the 2 to 3% inflation that we have, that Republicans didn't cause. This inflation was man-made, and that man's name was Joe Biden. I'm going to say it again, the president didn't father this child, but he's got to raise it, and we've done a pretty good job of dealing with inflation. We're not talking about the One Big Beautiful Bill and the money we're saving through less regulation, because we're busy fighting with the Pope.
Senator, I understand your position on that. I personally couldn't care less if the president's fighting with the Pope on, True Social. I'm really impressed with what the president's been able to do, and I'm a little disappointed with what the Senate has been unable to do. That's why I want to turn to the Save America Act. Very important to the president, very important to the American people. He's now floating the possibility of tying it to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. Watch this.
On FISA, Mr. President, Democrat Luna is pushing to have the Save America Act linked to FISA and the FISA renewal.
Well, I think she's great, and I'd love to see that. The Save America Act is so important. It's so good. It's voter ID. It's, basic. It's your basics about a democracy. Voter ID, birthplace. You have to be born in the United States to vote.
So, Senator, first of all, what do you think about tying it to FISA? And second, is the Senate going to do anything meaningful on the Save America Act or just voter ID in general? A lot of Americans are still very invested in this. I know we've had a couple of weeks of break from it, but I think it's still an important issue for the Senate to address.
If you want to restore people's confidence in elections, you do two things. We need to go back to an election day, not an election month. And we ought to require people to prove who they say they are in order to vote. Now, the SAVE Act does that in part. I will support tying the SAVE Act to the extension of FISA. I have said for 6 weeks we should attempt the SAVE Act through the reconciliation bill. Some of my colleagues think if we talk about the SAVE Act long enough, Democrats will give in. If you believe that, you're proof that human evolution is a slow process. Your Cocker Spaniel knows better. The Democrats are not going to vote for the SAVE Act. We're going to have to do it with Republican votes. The FISA bill is one option, but we also ought to attempt to do it through reconciliation, which we're in the middle of right now.
On that subject, Senator, the DHS shutdown is still going. Right, the Democrats caused the shutdown. It seemed like it was never going to end. Then both houses passed something different and left town. And even though some Band-Aids have been put on this thing, so it's not as publicly painful, it's still happening. I know that there's a conversation around reconciliation to deal with some of this and the deal with the Democrats and different approaches in the House and Senate. Where does that stand right now? When will that be resolved?
For 2 months, we kept asking the Democrats to fund ICE. They're not going to do it. Why? Because Senator Schumer's not the leader of the Democratic Party, and Minority Leader Jeffries is not. It's Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez and Mayor Mondani, and they are leaders of the loon wing of the Democratic Party, which is going to punish any Democrat that tries to do anything to help ICE, because they want to defund ICE just like they wanted to defund the police. We were talking to the wind for 2 months. I said for 2 months, forget about my Democratic friends. Let's just do it with Republican votes and do it through reconciliation. And that's what we're trying to do right now. If we had started it 2 months ago, we would have it done. As it is, I think we'll have it done in the next, hopefully, 2 weeks. I also, in addition to opening up DHS, I would like to attempt one or two other things in the reconciliation bill that Republicans can unite around. One is the SAVE Act, but there are other things I'm certainly willing to consider. We don't need Democratic votes to pass it. We just need Republican votes, and we should have done it. We should have done it long ago.
Real quick though, do you even have the Republican votes for it? I mean, that's been a lot of what we've been told by your colleagues, is that some folks, maybe Tom Tillis and others, aren't voting for some of these pieces of legislation anyway.
We will lose 1 or 2, maybe 3 Republican votes. We always have some free-range chickens that wander off. We don't need all Republicans to vote for it. We just need 50 votes. That's how we passed one big, beautiful bill. The vice president broke the tie. But I think there may be 1 or 2 who refuse to vote for anything the president wants and that makes sense. But it won't be enough to kill the bill, in my opinion.
Senator John Kennedy, thank you so much for your time on this beautiful Saturday night.
Thank you for having me, guys. Peace out.
Oh, Joey, never a dull moment with the senator there. So I want to pick up. I wish we, had more time to ask him more questions. I had a few, but I'll ask you instead. Maybe you can come up with some good one-liners to maybe, resemble him in that way. He's talking about the SAVE Act. The SAVE Act and the Save America Act are different things, but I'm going to assume he meant the Save America Act. I don't know if you could do that through reconciliation.
Yeah, it would be a longer discussion. As you can tell, we had a lot we wanted to ask him about, but I don't know what the pitch is to put reconciliation in there, unless you're trying to maybe fund the different ways you get your ID. And I've even said maybe that's how you attack the Democrats' attack on it, but then you're spending money. I don't know how that gets involved in budget reconciliation. There are only 3 ways to do budget reconciliation. That's through mandatory spending, revenue, and federal debt limit. And we hear them complain and argue and gripe over all 3 of those. Usually it's one bill, but you technically could break it down into 3 different bills. And so the Senate gets 1 bill per year on those 3 issues. I don't know how the Voting Act goes into that.
So do you think that that's a cop-out? Throw it in there, then the Senate parliamentarian throws it out,
I think that Senator Kennedy is actually, what he's being forthright. The only way they're passing anything is with 51 votes, and that's the best lever they have.
Or
the best vehicle.
Filibuster, which they're not going to do. But it would be nice if somebody would get some fortitude on these important issues. Anita, I want to go back to where we started in discussing the midterms and the vulnerabilities here. I agree. We've made some great gains. I think the president, obviously, he's having to deal with a conflict in Iran. So he's got to split his time. That's not his fault. That's the way life is. But what do Republicans outside of President Trump need to do to make the case to voters? Because, the senator, I respect him, but he's talking about the Pope, and I don't care. What are other Republicans not named Trump going to do to make the case to voters?
Well, he sounded fairly confident about the midterms. I was a little surprised to hear how confident he was. But, a lot of things have to be in the rear view by the time the midterms come around. The war needs to be buttoned up. Gas prices need to come down. Inflation is going to be a problem. And, what else do Republicans need to do? They need to go out and talk to their constituents about the big, beautiful bill, about the tax cuts, about the economy. I mean, that's something they have to do to keep the topic on the economy and off of the other things going on.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube, and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.
By the time this interview settles in, it becomes clear that John Kennedy is not simply offering campaign commentary. He is drawing a map of political survival. On the surface, the conversation moves across familiar territory. Iran, gas prices, inflation, election laws, immigration funding, and the Republican path to the midterms. But underneath those subjects is a deeper tension that gives this clip its real documentary power. It is the tension between spectacle and substance, between the loudness of modern politics and the quiet anxieties that shape ordinary American life after the cameras go dark. Kennedy's message, stripped of all its colorful phrasing, is blunt. Foreign policy might dominate the headlines, but elections are still won or lost in the places where people count bills, compare prices, and wonder whether tomorrow will cost more than today. That is what makes his argument so strategically interesting. He does not deny the seriousness of the situation in Iran. In fact, he leans into it. He frames the operation as necessary, even comparing the idea of a nuclear-armed Iran to giving a nuclear warhead to Charles Manson. It is provocative language designed to simplify an international conflict into a moral certainty. In his view, the blockade works. Iran's oil lifeline has been hit, and a deal favorable to America may follow soon. But then he does something more politically revealing. He says that if Republicans lose, it will not be because of Iran. And in that moment, the focus of the interview shifts from geopolitics to psychology, from what governments do overseas to what voters feel inside their own homes. That shift is where the story really comes alive, because Kennedy understands something central to democratic politics. People may admire strength abroad, but they vote according to pressure at home. He keeps returning to the same emotional center, the parents lying awake at night, worried about the cost of living. That line matters because it grounds the conversation. It drags the story away from ideological theater and brings it back to the private spaces where inflation is not a statistic, but a mood, a burden, a low-grade fear that reshapes daily life. He insists that Republicans need to talk more about taxes, small businesses, wage growth, and housing. In other words, he is arguing that voters do not just want ideological victory. They want evidence that somebody is trying to make life more affordable. And yet, what gives the clip its dramatic richness is that Kennedy is not delivering this message from outside the system. He is delivering it from within his own party, with a mix of loyalty and irritation. His most memorable line may be the most revealing. "I love the president like a taco. I don't always agree with him. It sounds funny, almost absurd, but it exposes the balance many party figures now try to maintain. Affection without total alignment, support without complete silence." He praises Trump's broader goals, but openly criticizes distractions, especially what he describes as a pointless fight with the Pope. This is not just comic relief. It is a sign of internal discipline trying to assert itself against political chaos. Kennedy is essentially saying that a party can survive disagreement, but it cannot afford distraction if voters are already worried about money. That makes this video more than a partisan interview. It becomes a study in message control during a volatile political era. Every modern campaign faces the same risk, being pulled away from what hurts voters most by the endless gravity of cultural conflict, personal feuds, viral distractions, and outrage cycles. Kennedy is warning against exactly that. His frustration is not only about Democrats, the media, or policy delays. It is also about wasted political attention. He seems to understand that if a governing party cannot tell a coherent story about lowering pressure on working families, then even its real successes may dissolve into noise. And once politics turns into noise, people stop listening until they reach the ballot box. The interview also widens into another major theme: institutional paralysis. When the discussion turns to the SAVE Act, FISA, and DHS funding, Kennedy paints Washington as a place where action is constantly delayed by procedure, partisan refusal, and what he mockingly calls free-range chickens within his own ranks. Again, the humor hides a serious point. He is describing a government where even shared goals can stall because consensus is fragile and timing is everything. That matters for your narration because it expands the story from one senator's sharp quotes into a broader portrait of democratic dysfunction. Even when politicians believe they know what needs to be done, doing it becomes its own battle. And maybe that is the deeper tension viewers will recognize in this clip. Not just Republicans versus Democrats, not just Trump versus his critics, but a larger conflict between urgency and distraction, between governance and performance, between what citizens need and what politics often chooses to talk about instead. Kennedy sounds confident that his party can still win. But confidence in this interview comes with conditions. The war must cool, gas prices must fall, Inflation must stay manageable, and Republicans must stop wandering off message. That is a long list, and that is exactly why the interview feels so revealing. Because beneath the jokes and swagger, there is a quiet admission that political strength is more fragile than it looks when the economy is still unsettled. So in the end, this story is not really about one senator's wit, or one weekend interview, or even one election cycle. It is about the oldest democratic question of all. Can leaders convince people that they understand the difference between symbolic fights and real life? Can they speak to the anxieties that never trend, but never disappear? And can a party fighting on global, cultural, and institutional fronts still persuade voters that it is focused on the price of gas, the cost of housing, the strain on paychecks, and the fear that tomorrow may be harder than today? That is the real drama here. And until that question is answered, every joke, every one-liner, and every policy promise sits under the same shadow. The shadow of whether voters will feel heard when it matters most. And that is why this moment deserves to be watched closely. Because behind the humor is a warning, and behind the warning is the future of political trust itself.